Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm one of the programming librarians at the Cary Library. And I'm really excited to have Karen Witemeyer here for our romance book club. We are small but mighty, and we meet once a month, usually, to chat about romance books that we love. So, a couple of announcements, I guess. You can buy Karen's signed books. She sent book plates to Bank Square Books. Is that right, Karen?
You were in charge of that, so I think that's correct, but I did send some signed book plates, so yes.
That's right. So you can buy signed books from Karen, any of her books, from Bank Square Books, up until supplies last for the book plates, but you can, of course, buy her books anytime. So there's that. And I would like to thank the Cary Library Foundation for supporting all of our adult programs. We wouldn't be able to do all this fun stuff without them. I would like to let you know that you can do questions in the chat, and I'll be paying attention to those. We are live streaming on Facebook, and people can ask questions on Facebook as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to do a quick introduction of Karen. For those who love to smile as they read, bestselling author Karen Witemeyer offers warm-hearted historical romance with a flair for humor, feisty heroines, and swoon-worthy Texas heroes. She was recently voted #1 reader's favorite Christian romance author by Family Fiction magazine. Karen is a 2-time winner of the ACFW Carol Award and 3-time RITA finalist. She's a firm believer in the power of happy endings and ice cream, which I completely agree with. I was looking at her website though, and her bio says that when she was doing her master's in psychology at Abilene Christian University, she met her and married her own Texas hero. He roped her in good, and for she has lived in Texas, and she has lived in Texas ever since. In fact, she fell so in love with this rugged land of sweeping sunsets and enduring pioneer spirit that she incorporates it into the pages of her novels, setting her stories in small towns of a state that burgeoned into greatness in the mid to late 1800s. And if you've read any of Karen's books, you know that this is absolutely true. So welcome, Karen. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm going to start with a question, which is, well, yeah, I guess it's a question. Can you tell us a little bit about what got you started in writing in historical inspirational romance? Because it's new to a lot of people that I know, but I think it's such a huge part of the romance community, and I'm interested in your history around it.
Sure. Well, I'm actually not an author who always knew I wanted to be a writer. I just love to read. And when I was young, my favorite things to read were historical novels. So I grew up with Anne of Green Gables and Little House on the Prairie and all those types of stories. I love to watch the old Westerns reruns on Saturday mornings. And those were kind of the formative things that shaped what I enjoyed about fiction, about story. And once I grew older and decided, you know what, maybe I do want to write someday. It was always a faraway dream that, okay, maybe someday I'll get around to doing that. Right now I'm going to college. Right now I'm having kids, right? And it was always just someday. Well, I had 3 preschool children at home. I was a stay-at-home mom. And my husband found out that his position was being downsized where he worked. And I kind of had this panic moment of, oh no, I have to do something to help, supplement the family income. What can I do? I know, I'll write a book because that's sure to make you lots of money right away. Everything will just work out fabulous. Didn't realize it was going to take me 6 years to get my first book published, but it was that little push that got me started. And so when I started to seriously look at writing, I knew that for me, for it to be fun, I needed to write what I enjoyed reading. And so what I enjoyed reading the most was historical romance. And I would read general market historical romance as well as Christian historical romance. But I am a Christian, and I knew that I wanted my worldview to come through my stories. And I also wanted to write stories that I wouldn't be embarrassed for my daughter to read, or for my mother-in-law to read, and she's read all of my books. So I wanted them to be clean. I wanted them to have lots of hope and positive messages. And I wanted it to be something that would provide books that just really kind of inspire and encourage people, because this world has enough darkness in it, and I wanted to really emphasize the light.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly think you have. Um, I wanted to read a quote from your website on the book, To Win Her Heart, because first of all, the, the heroine is a librarian, so of course, I have to mention this one. But I love what Publishers Weekly had to say about it. Is Witemeyer scores again with fresh, strong romance set in Spencer, Texas in 1887. She plots smoothly, writes crisp dialogue, and moves things along briskly. She also crafts surprisingly passionate attraction given the evangelical Christian provenance of the book, and the swipes at hypocritical piety are refreshingly non-denominational. What does that mean?
I'm not 100% sure about the end of that quote, what they were trying to get at there. I do write with a very general Christian message. So it's not specific to any denomination, that kind of thing. It's so in the world of Christian fiction, there are writers who write more overtly Christian. You'll have, scripture references, you'll have prayers, that kind of thing in the book. And you have those that are just more kind of sweet and clean, with an overall Christian worldview. Mine are somewhere kind of in the middle. Obviously, the story is what carries the book. I'm not trying to push any kind of agenda or make it preachy or anything like that. But my characters tend to be people of faith. And as people of faith, they're going to have their own conflicts and issues that come up. And they're going to deal with that as a person of faith would deal with those issues. And so you will see prayers in my book. You will see scriptures mentioned in my book. But it's all as a part of who the character is, not just a kind of a preachy message thrown in. So maybe that's kind of what they were getting at. There is a lot of romance too. I mean, I do write romance. So there's physical attraction, there's, the desire to be together and touching hands and kissing and that kind of thing. But of course, everything is kept very clean, and marriage is a must before anything more than that happens. So.
Well, I think that, there's obviously a market for it. And I think that's important for us to have the whole gamut of kinds of books for us to choose from. And I think I wonder if there are more Christian books or more clean books, or as I say, just kisses type of books now than ever before, as people are looking for something a little bit more inspirational, or possibly.
I've really seen, so Christian fiction for the last maybe 10 years or so, I think has held pretty steady. It hasn't, blossomed into ginormous growth that it had maybe 15 or 20 years prior. But I have seen an increase in the market of what I would call sweet and clean romance, which is kind of like Christian romance, except it usually doesn't have the spiritual themes in it. And so I think that really does show that people are looking for clean, feel good reads. I think it's kind of interesting at, probably, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, the erotic market really blew up. And I think it's kind of like two ends of the spectrum. One gets really big and it actually makes the other side get really big as well, because people kind of gravitate towards extremes. And so those that didn't want everything shown and told and all of that, we're looking for something that was the opposite of that. And I think some of them moved even out of the mainstream romance into the sweet and clean and the Christian market, just kind of as maybe a knee-jerk reaction. But I'm hoping that those that do find the stories appealing will come back, because it really is all about the love story, falling in love, that experience of meeting Mr. Right or Miss Right, and the kind of the soulmate aspect of it that really is at the heart of all romances, no matter where they are on the spectrum.
Right. Absolutely. And I think your books do a great job of that, of really touching on that. Um, I wanted to say too that your books um, aren't like, they're not controversial. I mean, like you don't like avoid controversial issues. Even in your signature line of of your latest book at Love's Command, Hangers Horsemen defend the innocent and obtain justice for the oppressed. I think that's really interesting. That you're still touching on the topics of historical significance. You may be doing it in a slightly different way. So, can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. I don't write with an agenda in mind, but I also don't want to sugarcoat history too much. We do tend to romanticize it, which is kind of part of the fantasy. But when I was writing this latest series, the Hangers Horsemen series, there are four ex-cavalry officers that kind of to me, the idea behind this was the A team meets the Magnificent Seven. So it's kind of like you have these four ex-military guys, but they're in the Old West and they're going out around and they're helping people who don't have anyone to help them with the injustice that they're having to suffer. And one of the four men is a Black man who was a Buffalo soldier, who then met up with these other cavalry officers, and they had a very bonding, horrible experience at Wounded Knee. Of course, that was a whole horrible incident. And of course, they were filled with so much guilt over what happened, even though they did their best to try to avoid loss of life. They were still scarred by that horrible massacre that happened there. And so that's what drove them into, we need to help people. We need to try to make up for what happened by helping those who can't help themselves. And so it was interesting to kind of dive in a little bit into the dynamics of having a Black character in with this group, and how people of this time period in Texas are going to treat him differently than they're going to treat the other men. And this really gets explored more in the next book that's going to come out next year, because it is Jonah's story as well as Mark's story, two of the other horsemen. And we do get into Jonah's POV with his character. And it was a really stretching experience for me to write a Black character. I had sensitivity readers come alongside me and offer their perspective, which was so valuable. And so it really was, especially in the culture that we're in right now, where there's so much divisiveness and so much anger and a lot of injustice that's going on right now. It was a chance for me to kind of explore some of those same themes with a little bit of distance, because it was historical instead of current times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough thing to tackle, I think, for any author, especially now with people trying to do own voices and things like that. So I know that every author that I've spoken to is very conscientious about portraying other cultures and backgrounds and things authentically.
Absolutely.
So I want to go back to a question about research, because obviously you must do a tremendous amount of research for your books. And one of them that I got a kick out of was Harvey Houses, the serving up love. I love that. And I liked the story about the Harvey Houses, because I was like, I never knew this. And then how you picked, it was a Gainesville.
Yes.
For the story. So could you speak to a little bit about the Harvey Houses themselves and then about your research?
Sure. So I first learned about the Harvey Houses as a young girl, because I used to love watching old Hollywood musicals. And Judy Garland has the Harvey Girls, old musical, and I had watched that as a teenager and loved it and thought it was funny and it was fun. And so years later, I'm trying to remember which book it was. I hadn't been published for very long. I think it was maybe my third book or so. I was doing a speaking engagement in a little town called Post, Texas, and the lady who had invited me to come had actually written a book about the Harvey Houses of Texas. And so we did a little book exchange. I gave her one of my books. She sent me one of her books. And that was a wonderful investment, because I had heard of the Harvey Houses, but I never realized we had them in Texas. And so looking through that book, it gave me a lot of inspiration, but it was years later before I actually got around to, I want to write a Harvey House story. And I got together with several other authors, and we all picked a different Harvey House that we wanted to focus on. And how I came up with Gainesville was mainly from that book that I had from her. She had done a lot of research and talked about, you know, the time period that the Harvey House was established. And I really wanted to stay as close to the 1800s as possible. This one, I think, goes over into 1901, 1902, I think is when it's set, because that was when the Harvey House was brand new. It was built. And the other thing that excited me about it was within driving distance. So I was able to go and see the actual Harvey House is still standing in the depot, the Santa Fe depot there. In fact, one of my readers invited me. She said, I live right outside Gainesville. Come and meet me, and I will arrange with the local museum there for you to have a guided tour. She just went above and beyond, and I got to see not only all of these old museum documents that the curator pulled out for me about the Harvey House and menus and train schedules and all kinds of things, but then I got to actually walk through the building. Of course, it doesn't look the same as it did back then. It's downstairs. It's pretty much just an open space, but it had a big horseshoe counter, a lunch counter. So it wasn't a formal dining room. This was a lunch counter. And when the trains would come through, they would all come in and eat at the lunch counter. Well, you could still see in the floor the horseshoe shape where the counter had stood. So even though the counter and the chairs were all gone, that permanent marking in the floor was still there. And it just kind of gave me goosebumps as I was standing there. You could see the room where the kitchen was. You could see the upstairs. They even let me go upstairs to see where the Harvey Girls would room up there. So I got to see, and they have one or two of the rooms actually set up as they were, you know, with an old bedstead and a washstand. And you're just like it would have for when the Harvey Girls were there. And the thing that was really cool was while I was upstairs, a train actually came by. So I felt like I'd just been transported back in time and I was there, and it was so fun. So being able to do research on site is such an exciting experience. You really feel like you're there. I don't get to do that very often. Most of my research is done just online because a lot of places aren't still standing like that one was. And so it was such a thrill to be able to go and see the place for myself, walk the same places that my heroine would walk. So that was really an exciting experience.
Mm-hmm. In that particular book, you said that in Gainesville, they had a different take on Harvey houses than in other places, which I also thought was fascinating because it seemed like it was the only one that saw waitresses. Harvey Girls were waitresses, right?
Yes.
As
So yeah, it was really interesting. And I got this actually from that same book. There was a little comment about it, how, you know, Gainesville was kind of a cow town, right? It was kind of rough and ready. You had all the cowboys coming through. Well, they really were trying to class it up. So they were really trying to do away with the Wild West kind of persona and make this a sophisticated town. Well, when the Harvey House was built and the girls came to work, the town, because they were trying to get away of, you know, the saloons and the brothels and that kind of thing, to the sophisticated people in the town, they saw any woman who worked downstairs and slept upstairs must be a prostitute. It doesn't matter that there's no men upstairs. It was just, that was because of the brothels and everything. That was just what the assumption was. So if you were a waitress, you must have very low morals and be, you know, a poor character, because the only females who wait tables and then live upstairs are prostitutes. So it was a very interesting kind of bias that my character had to fight when she took a job in that town. And it was something that made the house in Gainesville, it took them a while to become successful because they had this bias against the girls that worked there, even though Fred Harvey had very stringent standards that he only accepted girls of high moral character, and they had to dress in these uniforms that went up to the neck and down to the ankle, and their hair was always just so, and he had so many strict guidelines. But yet rumors are rumors, and that's kind of how they went and how you had to fight.
I guess I'm a little bit curious about why was it only Gainesville that had that perception?
I'm not sure. It may have existed other places as well. It may just be that it became more um, notarized in Gainesville, because I think they probably had some written records that maybe hinted at that, and that's where she got her research from. Um, it was interesting to me though that was the take there, and I think it's mainly because they were in that process of trying to separate themselves from that kind of wild town mentality and make a change. That they anything that even hinted that it was the similar style, they wanted to just kind of separate themselves from.
Mhm. So I guess we should actually talk about the book. um, can you tell us a little bit about Serving Up Love?
Sure. It is a novella collection, so there are four different stories, all taking place during different time periods and in different locations. Um, it's it's it was a really fun collection to do because we each of the authors kind of wrote their own story, but it had that same tie-in of all being Harvey House heroines. My particular story, it stands by itself, but it is kind of the heroine is the younger sister of a character who had her own book, More Than Words Can Say, which was the book right before this one. And so readers could meet her first in that other book, and then she has her own story here. And she's trying to escape some poor decisions that she made as a young woman. She was trying to help her father and made some poor choices. And because of that, she doesn't want to be in her hometown anymore. And so she takes a job as a Harvey girl in order to escape that. And she's hoping to make her way out to California to have as much distance as possible between her and the town in Texas where she's from. And then this new Harvey House opens in Gainesville, and the company orders her to go back. And it's only, a short distance from the town that she grew up in. And so she's really nervous about being there. And what if her secret comes out and that kind of thing. And of course, the hero is fascinated by her, even though she wants nothing to do with him and is trying to keep, all men at arm's length, partly because of her job, and partly because she's afraid her secret's going to come out. And of course, as secrets do, it does eventually come out and causes all kinds of problems. And then she has to decide if she's going to run away or if she's going to stay and fight for the love that she finally found. So.
I'm going to guess that she probably had a happily ever after.
Of course, you can't have a Karen Witemeyer book without a happily ever after.
No. I mean, it says it right in your bio.
That's right. Guaranteed.
That's right. It's got to be true. So you've written, several series, several standalones, several novellas. Can you talk about maybe, this is going to be an unfair question, about your favorite book that you wrote?
I get asked that a lot, and my first instinct is to say, well, it's like asking a mother who her favorite kid is. I mean, you can't pick. They're all special in their own way. It's a lot like that with my books too. Of course, the one that I just finished is always the one that I think, that one was good. At least I think it's good until then I start doubting it, and I'm like, oh, maybe it's not. But that's kind of the normal cycle that we authors go through. If I had to pick, I might pick To Win Her Heart, just because the hero in that book, he's special because he has a lisp, so he has a speaking impediment, and because of that, he uses books to increase his vocabulary so that he can get around saying words that have the S sound. And so working with him in this story, trying to create a dialogue that had no S sounds was very difficult and challenging, but it was so fun at the same time. And his story is such a redeeming story. He probably has one of the biggest character arcs of any of my heroes, and there was something about that one that was just special. But like I say, all of them are special in their own way, so it's hard to pick.
Well, my next question was going to be, who's your favorite character to write? So I guess we're all set with that one. I'm But I'm going to go back to the research question because you do have such a wide range of stories and um, topics and things like that. How do you pick what you're going to do next?
Well, I consider myself kind of an odd author because a lot of authors that I talk to have a ton of ideas, and the hard part for them is narrowing down which one they want to do. I am the opposite of that. I struggle to find an idea, and when I finally get one, I hold on to it with both hands and I don't let it go until I can make something out of it. So I never know for sure where inspiration is going to strike. My latest series, I kind of mentioned that it was inspired by, the A-Team meets Magnificent Seven. So that was like an old 80s TV show that I watched, as a teenager. And, that just kind of bubbled back up to me. And so I was like, well, let's see what I can do with that. Some stories have come to me based off of maybe a movie I've seen or another book I've read. Um, a lot of brainstorming. I have a Facebook group called the Posse, and they help me brainstorm, and it's wonderful. In fact, I'm getting them to help me brainstorm my next book right now, which is great. I love that. But I do a lot of research into the individual characters and the setting. A lot of my books are set in a similar time period, usually 1880s to 1890s. And so since I kind of have that as my comfort zone, I don't have to do a lot of extra research as far as, what's available during this time period, because I kind of already have a good feeling for that. But I do need to research all the different elements of the characters themselves. So their occupations, where did the railroad go? Is there a railroad in this town? What's the lay of the land? What kind of vegetation is here? What kind of things would they have access to the telegraph? Would they have access to refrigeration? Would they have, I mean, there's a whole lot of things that just come in the day-to-day work of these, building these characters' lives that I have to really investigate. So I like when I was telling the story of Wounded Knee, I had to do a lot of deep historical research because I wanted to capture, I retold that piece of that story from my character's POV. But I wanted to make sure I got all of the historical details correct because that was such a key moment in history. And so whenever I tackle something that is an actual historical event, I try to keep, as many things as I can true to the historical event themselves, and then just add the POV of my character through the lens that he is seeing it or she is seeing it.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. Is your Facebook group, is it just authors or is it like readers as well?
No, it's designed for readers. So yeah, it's called the Posse, and it's people who enjoy my books. Maybe even I have people join that was like, well, I wanted to read your book, but I haven't read it yet. Can I still join? I'm like, sure. It's just we talk about books. It's a fun community of just people who like the same style of books. We get together and we chat and we share stories. We do fun craft things together. We're in the middle of doing a Posse ornament exchange right now. So we just do all kinds of fun stuff that's just kind of fun and encouraging in a way to kind of build community and be able to chat together.
Mm-hmm. That sounds awesome. Emily says the Posse is awesome. That's where I got that from. And from start to finish, how long does it take you to write a book?
I am a very slow writer. So a lot of authors write in multiple drafts. They'll do a real quick first draft just to get the main ideas down, and then they'll go back and they'll add layers and they'll clean it up. I'm a perfectionist. I'm really more of an editor than I am a writer. So I write really slow and I write one very polished draft and then I turn it in. So my goal is to write one polished chapter a week. And if I do that for 40 weeks, then I have a book. So I do one full-length novel a year, and I do one novella a year. And a novella is usually about 10 chapters. My full-length stories can be anywhere from like 36 chapters to 41 chapters, I think was my longest. So if you calculate that all out, I've got 40 weeks to write a full-length book. I've got 10 weeks to write my novella, and that leaves me only 2 weeks to play with in the year. So I'm almost always writing something, and if I get behind, I have to find ways to make up the time. So that's how long it takes, but it's because I write so slowly.
Well, you also said that you work full time, so time might be a little bit of a thing too.
That is true. Yes, I do have a day job. I work, 8 to 5 at Abilene Christian University. I'm actually in charge of their catalog, so I get my nonfiction writing in as well during the day job. So yeah, that I end up doing a lot of writing over the weekends, and that kind of thing. But even if I didn't have that, I'm not. It would be challenging to see if I could handle more because my brain just doesn't spout a lot of creativity. It's work for me to come up with ideas and craft the words just right. So I'm not sure if I'd be able to write faster even if I didn't have the day job, but
You'd
maybe
probably be
someday I'll
eating,
retire and we'll see.
maybe you'd be eating more ice cream. Who knows?
That's, ice cream helps everything
Yes, I agree.
except the waist.
uh, yes, exactly. Gotta watch that. Emily says she's so grateful for all your hard work writing. Your stories are always worth the wait. And that actually brings me to a question that has been asked almost to every author that we've had is how have you been doing in terms of writing during COVID?
Um, Thankfully, COVID hasn't affected me too much as far as writing goes, because it's something that I do at home by myself. I mean, that's pretty easy to still continue doing. As things come up, though, the day job has ended up becoming more stressful as I'm trying to tackle more responsibilities with that because of different situations that arise. So that can kind of creep into the writing side of things. And then, of course, just the stress of worrying about family and those around me. My in-laws actually live right next door, and they're in their 70s, and we're trying to be very conscientious about taking care of them and making sure we don't expose them to anything. So I think probably just the extra level of stress is the only real thing that I have felt, but the actual just sitting down and writing hasn't changed too much for me.
Okay. Well, I know that many readers have said that they've turned more to reading in the last few months than ever before as a stress reliever. Have you found that too? Have you had more people contacting you through your webpage or Facebook or social media or anything like that? Because there does seem to be a tremendous need.
I have heard from readers who say that they're wanting to spend more time reading because it is an escape and it's also something you can do at home. I've had a lot of readers who have said that they're going back and binge reading all of my backlist because they have them on their keeper shelf, right? So they're going back and they're just picking them up and reading them again because they know that they're going to be, because I have humor and kind of lighthearted style, they know they're going to be something that's going to leave them feeling happier and lighter. And especially with all the stress that COVID brings, that's something that I think a lot of people find helpful.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody has not read your books, where would you recommend they start?
Um, so from kind of just anecdotal data from listening to readers, the most common book that readers pick as their favorite is Short Straw Bride. So I think if I was going to recommend a book to somebody, that would probably be the one I would recommend because that was kind of my breakout novel, and the one that the vast majority of readers claim to be their favorite. So that's the first in my Archer Brothers series. And so that would probably be the one that I would recommend that they start with.
Can you tell us a little bit about it? No spoilers, just a little bit to get our feet wet.
Sure. Well, the Archer brothers, so they're going to sound a little similar to my Hanger Horseman guys. But they're a set of brothers who live on a ranch, and they have their parents died early, and in order to protect their ranch, they basically blocked themselves off from the world. So they never left their property, and they never let anybody onto their property. It was just they were kind of walled off to keep themselves safe. Most of that was because they were too young to do anything. So when their parents died, they were still very young. Um, the only person that came onto their land was a little girl named Meredith, and she came on accident. Some little bully from school was teasing her and tossed her lunch pail onto their property, so she had to go and retrieve it. And when she did, She ended up accidentally stepping in an animal trap that closed on her foot. And so she was injured and she was in a lot of pain. And the oldest, Travis Archer was the oldest boy. He ends up coming and rescuing her. And from that point on, he's like, we're not having any of these traps out anymore. And so then he helps her get on her way. And after that, heroic rescue, in her mind, he's kind of, her ideal hero. And as she grows up, she remembers that kind act. And when she overhears a plot by the villain of the story to burn the Archers out because he wants their land for logging purposes, she knows she has to go back and warn them about this villain coming to burn them out. And so she takes her life in her hands and crosses onto that property. And lo and behold, Travis actually remembers who she is. And so the romance kind of takes off from there.
Sorry, I was muted. I always forget what I am. From Facebook, Yolanda says she loves your books. And top of her list for your books is To Win Her Heart. Just loved what you did with his character and overcoming his lisp and just his past in general.
That's sweet. Thank you.
And one thing I forgot to tell people at the beginning is that Karen actually sent me a bunch of virtual swag, which I am going to share with everybody who is in the meeting. And I will put my email in the on the Facebook chat too, so that anybody who would like to have some Karen Witemeyer swag can have some. So thank you so much for doing that. It's pretty exciting.
Sure, it's fun. It's little. There's a background wallpaper for your computer or your phone, and it looks a lot like I don't know if you can. That's kind of bright. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, the Kissing Tree is my latest novella collection, and it's the virtual swag is done in that same style. So I hope you enjoy it.
Well, thank you. That was very generous of you. Talking about the Kissing Tree, I was looking at this sort of excerpt of it, and I want you to talk a little bit more about it because the characters are a little bit older, which is, unusual. But I love this quote from it. The attention of a serious man focused solely on one gal was far more tantalizing than any fleeting attention a charmer could offer. I just think that's awesome. I think that is so true. That the person you want in your life is not just somebody who's going to flame out, that's somebody who's going to stay with you and be steady. And, some of the things that we think are important aren't really that important. So can you speak to the Kissing Tree a little bit?
Sure. This novella was so fun to write. The collection is focused around this giant oak tree where courting couples go to carve their initials. And my story is the second story in the book. And my group, my heroine, Phoebe, wants to build an inn so that she can share the Kissing Tree with a bunch of other couples. So she believes that she will never find love herself. She's kind of a spinster type character, and but she loves love and she wants to share that with other people. And so she's building this inn, and she is very much a dreamer, and she's also rather literal. So in her mind, things that are romantic are things that look like Valentines. So they're pink, and there's cupids, and there's lace, and all that stuff, which is also very popular in the Victorian era anyway. And so she really goes over the top with all of her decoration choices. Well, her father is a land developer, and he's the one that has allowed her to build this property. But he also knows that she needs a little help in order for this place to actually be successful. And so he sends his top man to go and assist her with the project. And this is Barnabas, and he's the hero. And of course, he calls himself, stodgy. So he's stodgy practicality, and she's the dreamer that has all these lacy Valentine ideas. And the two have to kind of find a way to make things work together. And as they do, they realize that they're stronger together than they are apart, which is kind of the main theme of the story is that you're better when you're with somebody that brings out the best in you and doesn't just get distracted by all the things that would annoy them, or that kind of thing. So, and I had a lot of fun with this one. I think this is probably one of my funniest stories. My stories have humor, but they're not really comedies, I wouldn't say. They're more kind of adventure stories that have a humorous touch. But this one, I think, comes the closest to an actual rom-com that I've written.
Mm-hmm. Where do you get your inspirations for your characters? Because they are they're just so diverse, so different from each other. And yet they seem, like obviously the couples find each other, but like, where do you get your inspiration for them?
This is going to sound a little, I don't know if this is going to sound good or not. There's a lot of me in the characters. So the things that I find attractive, that's going to be in my hero, right? Because if I'm not attracted to him, I can't expect my readers to be attracted to him. So I'm going to give him character traits that I value and that I see as attractive, not just physically, but their personality traits. And then in my heroines, a lot of times they will have similar personalities to what I feel like I have, or sometimes they'll just have things that I wish I had. And so, like, I don't know anything about medicine, but I had a female doctor as one of my heroines, but she had a lot of drive and ambition, and her career was very important to her, and she didn't want to sacrifice that career when she married. And so I kind of see a lot of my own drive and desire to have a career in writing and that kind of thing, and feeling so thankful that I have a husband that supports me in that. And so that's those are kind of the elements that come together to influence my characters. They're all different, they all have their own, they're a lot of them have nothing to do with me, but they all kind of have a core piece that has me in it, as far as what I value and what I look for, or what I would be attracted to in a hero.
Mm-hmm. And the 1800s, do you think, you had mentioned this earlier, like, did they have railroads? Did they have the telegraph? Did they have refrigeration? And I think those are really interesting questions. And I also think that brings me to the question about your heroines in that time period. How do you keep them true to the time period? Because there were different restrictions on women back in the day. I mean, there's, obviously every era there are, but how do you keep them true to the time period?
That's a good question, because we want them to be authentic to their time period, but we also want them to be relatable to modern day readers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of maybe you call it a trademark, is I love the feisty heroine. I do not like the weepy heroine that just waits for things to happen to her. I want someone who's going to go out and make things happen. And that quality isn't, there were a lot of women in the 1800s who did have that quality, but there were a lot that didn't. Part of why I have my stories set in Texas is because it kind of has that pioneering spirit that you have to be tough in order to make it in that land at that time. And so part of the reason why I don't have my stories set in like the Gilded Age in New York or something like that, is because I want that heroine who's not afraid to go out and take charge, and to, if she needs to know how to shoot, she needs to know how to do, these things, because you can't always wait for the man to come around in order to take care of you. So having them set kind of on the frontier helps some. As far as allowing them more freedom to have that kind of feisty self-sufficiency. But I also think that because most of my characters have kind of that Christian core, that also helps them not take things too far. So they're not over the top self-sufficient. They still care about people. They're still compassionate. They still want to have healthy relationships and not always just do everything on their own. And so that kind of helps foster the romantic side as well. So it's kind of a careful balance of, you want them to be people that your modern reader can relate to, but you also want them to be true to the time period. And that's not just I hear a lot, you don't want to just dress up a modern woman in a costume and call it a historical romance. There has to be a lot more to it than that. It has to be someone who is part of that time period and authentic to that time.
Right. Well, because human nature is such that, there are feisty women all through history. It's how they handle the time period that they're in and the restrictions that they have that makes an interesting story, I think.
Right.
So we've talked a lot about your heroines and a little bit about your heroes. Can you talk a little bit more about your heroes and how they come to be and how you find the right match for your feisty heroines?
So I do love the strong silent type, I must say. And so you will find several of the strong silent types in my heroes. In More Than Words Can Say is probably my most silent hero. He doesn't like to talk at all. And the heroine really has to drag things out of him. And it's kind of his gift of love is when he is trying to actually express something that hints at emotion. That's a really big step for him. And so I also love like Beauty and the Beast kind of stories. So you'll have heroes that have a lot of woundedness in their past that can shape them and make them afraid of relationships and that kind of thing. I love the gruff on the outside, teddy bear on the inside kind of heroes. So that kind of will come out in a lot of my heroes. But really their core is that they are godly men who have a code and they are honorable and they are people that can be depended upon.
Mm-hmm. So important. Yolanda says on Facebook, in More Than Words Can Say, it was done beautifully, showing the restrictions of the time, but also the fighting attitude that Abigail had.
Yeah, she ran her own bakery, which was unusual in that time period for a woman to own her own business if it wasn't like a laundry or a seamstress shop. And in fact, I took a little bit of liberty with Texas in that book and made the town actually have an ordinance that said a woman couldn't own her own business. And it was kind of the women who had come before had owned brothels and things like that. And so the way of getting rid of that was to pass this outdated ordinance now that, said, well, a woman couldn't own her own business. And so she had to fight against that in order to keep her business going. And so it had a little bit of leeway I took with actual history of the town, because it was a real town that I set that one in. It was in Honey Grove. And I did have a little disclaimer at the end that they really didn't have this ordinance there. But it was interesting because there were very few occupations that women could have during that time period and still be considered, a woman of character. So as, getting closer to the turn of the century, you had more avenues open up. But initially, you could be a school teacher, you could be a laundress, you could maybe be a seamstress, but that was pretty much it. And so having a woman run her own bakery and have it be successful was really kind of ahead of her time.
Mm-hmm. Emily says, I loved More Than Words Can Say. Now I want to go and reread it. And Elizabeth asks, some authors have written devotionals. Is that something you may consider in the future?
I've written some, but not published. However, I do have a plan in the works that I've been talking with my publisher about. There's going to be a new print anthology of Christmas stories that will just be my Christmas stories. Two of them will have been published before digitally, and one will be a brand new story. And in that compilation, just because there's only 3 stories, so they wanted to add a little more content, that we have talked about adding a devotional or 2 kind of centered around Christmas to that, as well as maybe some recipes and maybe some just historical tidbits of what Christmas in the 1800s would be like in Texas. So that's the one thing I have on my radar that may be published soon as far as a devotional. Other than that, I teach a ladies' Bible class at my church, and so they get to hear my devotionals, but that's about it.
Maybe you need to put them on Zoom now.
That's right.
So funny. Unbelievably, we've been talking for almost an hour now. And I wanted to make sure to ask you what's up next for you. What can we look forward to from you next?
So the next book will be book 2 in my Hangers Horsemen series, The Heart's Charge. And I mentioned earlier that will feature 2 of the horsemen's stories. So it'll have Jonah's story and Mark's story. And one of the things that's kind of unique about this is a lot of times you will have, the main romantic lead and his heroine, and then you'll have maybe a romantic subplot. Well, I didn't want to just do a subplot. I wanted to do 2 full, robust romance stories. So this book will actually have 4 POV characters. There'll be 2 hero point of views and 2 heroine point of views. And you will get it's basically like a 2-in-1. So it's 2 stories that are woven together. They're taking place in the same setting, in the same time, all of that. But you get 2 full romance stories with the 4 POVs. And I'm really excited about that. This was a challenging book to write because 2 of the characters are Black characters. And so writing them from their point of view was very challenging and stretching for me. I did have sensitivity readers come alongside me because I know that I cannot speak authentically from that point of view on my own. I need their perspective to add that flavor of authenticity to it. So it was a very challenging yet very rewarding story to write, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the readers respond to it.
Well, we'll look forward to it. Emily says, when can we pre-order this Christmas novella collection?
So that one that I was talking about, I actually just finished writing the novella for it. And so it will come out, I believe, in 2021. So probably late fall, maybe October. So hopefully pre-orders would be up a couple months before that, but I haven't gotten too far in that process yet. So that one's still in the early stages.
Well, like I said, we'll look forward to all these. So one last question is, I know you're busy with work and kids and family and writing, but what are you reading and what would you recommend that we read?
Let's see. So some of my favorite reads lately, I've been reading some of Mimi Matthews' stories. She writes not Christian romance, but she writes sweet and clean romance set in the Regency time period. I've really been enjoying those. Jen Turano is one of my favorite Christian authors. She writes historical Christian romance with a really quirky, funny sense of humor. She sets hers in the Gilded Age, and her characters get in so many crazy scrapes. It is a lot of fun. So those are 2 that I've read most recently. Mary Connealy is another that I really enjoy. Regina Jennings, I really enjoy hers, and she's been in a lot of my novella collections, and she's a good friend. So I would recommend hers as well.
Awesome. I just wrote that in the chat so people can take notes.
Wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for this, Karen. This has been so enlightening to me. I think we had some, I feel like I'm going to be expanding my horizons like crazy now.
Well, it's been so much fun for me too. I'm so thankful for everyone that came, and for those that are looking at Facebook, thank you for coming. It made it a lot of fun for me to have your questions.
Well, thank you all for coming. I'll send out that swag in the next couple of days. And remember, you can buy books, signed books from Karen from Bank Square Books. I'll send out that link as well tomorrow. So you can buy books up to the end of the week, I think, or until they run out. So I'm guessing that a bunch of us will be ordering in more than words can say. It just sounds awesome. So anyways, thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Karen, for your time and your thoughts. And we look forward to all of your future books.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here tonight.
All right. Bye, everybody.